Good morning, Europe. It's Friday, the 15th of June. Our top stories for you. Migrant row. After a spat between France and Italy, the leaders meet about the migrant crisis. This as a rescue boat with 629 migrants sailed towards Spain. We'll talk to our correspondent, the only broadcast journalist on board with them. Lifeline in danger. Fighting in Yemen's key port intensifies, threatening to cut off access to aid and food. Who gets the last word? The latest infighting over Brexit. And from the Cube, our social media news desk.
As the World Cup 2018 kicks off, we'll have all the moments that got you talking.
And not the most sophisticated looking criminal, but effective nonetheless. How a thief broke into a Toronto gallery and walked away with a Banksy. Thank you for starting your day with us. Now, after days of political bickering, the leaders of France and Italy will come face to face in Paris today. And the migrant crisis in Europe is expected to be top of the agenda. More specifically, 629 migrants at the heart of the row between the two countries. Rescued from the Mediterranean last weekend, they're heading for Spain after Italy closed its ports to all but Italian-flagged vessels. Now, they've been at sea for almost a full week now. And after some stormy weather, they're now on the last leg of their journey. 3 boats carrying the group to safety are currently sailing past the northern coast of Sardinia. They're expected to arrive at the Spanish city of Valencia on Sunday. Our correspondent Annelise Borges is the only broadcast journalist traveling aboard the Aquarius, and she's been with the migrants on board that ship, and she's joining us live now. Annelise, you've been there since the beginning. What is the latest that you know so far?
Well, Tesa, we have extremely sad news to report today. We have obtained confirmation from Doctors Without Borders aboard Aquarius that 2 people have drowned during that dramatic rescue last Saturday. Over the last few days, people have been coming forward with reports of missing family members. And after interviews with several different groups of people, MSF was able to put the picture together and to confirm that 2 people have died during that dramatic rescue. And as someone who was aboard those fast boats that approached the people in distress, I can tell you, Tesa, it is quite remarkable that no more casualties have been reported. That operation lasted 5 hours. 219 people were actually able to be retrieved from the moments that the operation itself was absolutely dramatic. 40 people, in the space of a few minutes, 40 people fell in the water with no life vests and not knowing how to swim. And so it just goes to show how difficult things have been for these people. Things happened like that for them and are still very difficult for them a week after that dramatic night.
Yeah, and at least unimaginable conditions indeed. And you've been speaking to a lot of the people on board. You've been listening to their stories. What have been the most striking things that they've been telling you?
Well, I think the most humbling thing about this whole experience is just to witness how resilient these people are, despite spending hours at sea without knowing what was happening to them, what was going to happen to them, and then going through that dramatic rescue. These people are still relatively calm. They are saying that they are looking forward, of course, to reaching shore, to reaching land. But right now, I think that medics are the ones that are the most anxious about reaching Spain, because of course they understand how difficult the last few days have been for these people, and they understand how dangerous this long trip can be for the migrants. And of course they've also been saying how worried they are about what else is happening at sea, how many more people are in need of help right now in the Mediterranean. And as of now, there is no clear indication as to when Aquarius will be able to return to the search and rescue zone off the coast of Libya.
The days aboard Aquarius have meant different things for different people. For those rescued at sea, they represent a second chance. A second chance to go to school, to find a job, to raise a family, to start anew. For those bearing witness, the days at sea were an unbearable reminder of why they set out to do this in the first place.
This is my home, and this is happening in my backyard.
Ça te fait quoi?
It hurts to see that there'll always be men taking advantage of other men. We forget the humanity in all this. We think about money, about futile things, and we don't think about life.
Since it started conducting search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean Sea in 2016, Aquarius has assisted nearly 30,000 people. Now the mission is at risk. Questions remain as to whether NGOs will be able to continue assisting those who risk crossing the world's deadliest migration route.
Obviously, our intention is to be able to return operational as a search and rescue vessel in the area of the coast of Libya as soon as possible. In this moment, it's difficult to foresee how long this will take.
As Aquarius continues its journey towards the Spanish port of Valencia, both those who needed a helping hand and those who were there to land one have more questions than answers about their future. For now, they are living day by day with the certainty that their lives were forever altered by this encounter.
And so everyone on board Aquarius will have to be a little bit more patient, Tesa, because we still have quite a few hours to go. Our estimated time of arrival in the Spanish port town of Valencia is Sunday morning.
All right, thank you for that report. Annelise Borges live on board the Aquarius. Well, the fate of those on board has sent Europe into a state of diplomatic and political confusion. Although Italy has been criticized by many, others are calling for its voice to be heard. And for more on this, the Daily Beast World News editor Christopher Dickey joins us live now from Paris. Christopher, just how deep are the divisions within the EU?
Well, they're very deep. They're not only deep among the different countries, they're even deep within countries. There's a huge crisis brewing inside Germany, which is the key player in all this. Between Angela Merkel and Horst Seehofer, her interior minister, who wants much stricter regulations at German borders than she has been willing to give him. So it's an extremely difficult situation. You've got Italy and France divided. You've got now Spain playing a different role than it used to play because it has a new government. And then you have Poland and Hungary, who really don't want any migrants at all in their country and are completely unsympathetic to countries that say there should be shared responsibility throughout the European Union for taking care of these migrants.
Yeah, and Christopher, this is the backdrop upon which the upcoming EU summit will be taking place, and this is going to be a hot topic. Can we expect anything from this summit then?
Well, we haven't seen much in the past. Every summit in recent years, it says we're going to address this problem, and yet it never gets addressed in a satisfactory way. You always run up against the problem of, yes, let's keep them from coming into Europe, but let's not watch people die in the Mediterranean. And people have continued to come and continued to die in this tense kind of limbo where the European Union itself cannot reach a united policy about how to deal with this.
All right, thank you for that, Christopher Dickey, the Daily Beast World News editor. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now, from blue jeans to bourbon, European Union countries have unanimously backed a plan to put import duties on 2.8 billion euros worth of U.S. products. The measures, which still need to be adopted by the European Commission, come after the U.S. announced tariffs on EU steel and aluminium. The Commission previously suggested import tariffs on products such as American motorcycles and orange juice. If passed, the EU measures are expected to be in place by the beginning of next month. Well, U.S. President Trump is expected to announce $50 billion worth of tariffs on China today. Duties of up to 25% are expected on 800 product categories. China has said it's prepared to respond if Trump goes ahead with the move. Now, British Prime Minister Theresa May is facing a new rebellion over Brexit, and this after some Conservative MPs announced they're planning to table new amendments to the withdrawal bill. Jessica Saltz is in London for us with this story. Jessica, what is behind this maneuver? What can you tell us?
Well, Tessa, a group of pro-Remain Conservative MPs are furious with Theresa May, accusing her of going back on her word on a compromise that their group struck with the government last week to avoid a hard Brexit. Now, this pro-Remain group is headed up by Dominic Grieve, and he has said that the government's backtracking is unacceptable. And he has support from around a dozen pro-Remain Conservative rebels who in recent hours have been quite vocal, questioning their ongoing support of Theresa May in Brexit negotiations, and they are saying that they want to now bring back their original demands and put them on the table next week when negotiations continue, which looks to make discussions next week certainly a lot more complicated. Now, Theresa May certainly seems to have taken a side with the Brexiters on this issue, but she certainly can't afford to be losing a lot of support from her Conservative camp at a time when these negotiations on Brexit are so crucial. And with an upcoming summit in the EU summit at the end of the month, certainly it seems at the moment British MPs are spending far too much time bickering with each other than making any progress.
Yeah, and Jessica, in this case, what are we watching for next?
Well, I think this summit at the end of the month will be crucial. And of course, by this stage, Theresa May hopes to be able to present to Brussels some real clear ideas of what Britain has planned for Brexit with regards to the EEA and remaining in the customs union. But of course, this remains very complicated at the moment. And I think next week there's going to be a lot of ping-ponging on this very crucial withdrawal bill between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And when it comes back to the House of Commons, as I said, it looks like negotiations are going to be incredibly complicated. There's not only split on Brexit within the Conservative camp, but also great divisions within Labour as well. So as I said, really a lot of discussions between MPs at the moment and a lot of disagreement.
Yeah, and a lot of drama too. Thank you for that, Jessica Salt, live there in London. Now, thousands of people took to the streets of West London on Thursday to join a silent march for victims of London's Grenfell fire. The rally marked the first anniversary of the tower block's blaze, Britain's deadliest domestic fire since World War II. Friends and relatives of the 71 people killed led the march. Thousands followed them wearing green scarves and holding green banners, a color adopted by the community of survivors and bereaved people as a symbol of tragedy. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, food and aid supplies are under threat as fighting continues over a critical port in Yemen. We'll speak to an aid group about what's being called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But first, let's look at your weather. You're watching Good Morning Europe, our top story. We now know that 2 people went missing and are presumed drowned before the rescue of hundreds of migrants in the Mediterranean last weekend. 629 migrants at the center of a diplomatic spat are continuing their journey towards Spain. This as the leaders of France and Italy are now expected to meet today after their political spat over the issue. A major new military offensive launched in Yemen could make a humanitarian crisis there much worse. Now, after 3 years of a devastating civil war, the country is on the brink of starvation. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has this story.
What may be the world's worst and least known humanitarian crisis is on the verge of becoming a catastrophe. At least 2,000 fighters backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are advancing on the ground and from the sea and air on the port city of Hodeidah. This is day 2 of a long-planned and potentially decisive battle to drive out rebels holding the port. Hodeidah is one of the only remaining lifelines for the country after 3 years of civil war. An estimated 8 million people are at risk of starving, and 70% of humanitarian supplies come in through this now nearly impassable war zone.
8 million people, even before this morning, were already at risk of starvation. If the port is closed, even for a day, this means that these people will die.
Food and water are in chronic short supply. More than 1 million people have been struck by cholera, one of the world's worst outbreaks. The United States has some responsibility for all this. While the Pentagon says it is not involved in the offensive, the U.S. has quietly backed Saudi and Emirati forces battling to drive out the rebels, supplying intelligence and arms. The Pentagon has called for maximum efforts to avoid civilian casualties and for all sides to engage in negotiations. Richard Engel, NBC News.
Well, the UN Security Council is calling for the port to remain open to avert a humanitarian disaster. And for more on this, I'm joined by Yolanda Jacquemet, a Middle East spokeswoman for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, you have been in touch with teams on the ground there in Hodeidah. What do you know about the situation?
We're extremely concerned about the situation, both because, as you said previously, Hodeidah is the real lifeline for millions of Yemenis. It is the main port in the country through which most food supplies and fuel supplies enter. And this is a country of 29 million people where 3 out of each 4 citizens depend on humanitarian aid. So these are staggering numbers. But beyond this wider picture, of course, the fate of Hodeidah itself is at stake. We speak of about 600,000 people in the city. A study that we at the International Committee of the Red Cross have published exactly 1 year ago shows that wars in cities make up to 5 times more victims than wars elsewhere. Cities are extremely vulnerable organisms, and we call on those fighting to remember their duty to spare civilians and to spare civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals and water systems. This is critical.
Yeah, Yolanda, just to highlight what you said about this being a key port, I think about 80% of imports are coming through this port. What is the alternative if this port is not open?
There is unfortunately no alternative. It is the largest port in Yemen, and despite a very demanding inspection system that is in place, which has made that ships have been trekking through the port through the past 2 years, it is still the main entry point for the highlands where the 2/3 of the Yemeni population live. So there is simply no alternative, and the closure of this port would mean potential death for those who are on the brink of famine.
Yeah, indeed, no alternative, and you have hundreds of thousands of people at risk here. So how much worse could things get? What are you watching out for now that we should be careful of?
It is very difficult to imagine that the situation could be worse. We've been saying for over 1 year now that this is the largest humanitarian catastrophe in the world, that Yemenis are on their knees, and they are. This conflict is in its 4th year. Half of the people have no access to healthcare. Civil servants have lost income for now 2 years, and the civil servant in Yemen used to feed a large extended family. Millions of children are malnourished. Millions are out of school. It's a whole generation whose future is at risk. So it seems difficult to imagine how this could get worse. And yet, if Hodeidah were to close imports, indeed, this country that has been drip-fed, it would mean as if, you have a sick person that's being drip-fed and you all of a sudden cut the drip.
All right, thank you for that, Yolanda Jacquemet. Thank you very much. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, a new study shows the rate of ice melt in Antarctica is accelerating. Plus, an art thief caught on camera stealing a Banksy in a Pink Panther-esque heist in Canada. That's something to watch out for. But first, your weather. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back. Now, it's melting 3 times faster than a decade ago. Antarctica is now melting so fast that scientists say that it could raise sea levels by 15 centimeters within the next 80 years. Louise Miner has a story.
Antarctica is now melting 3 times faster than ever before. That's according to a new international study. Scientists say since 1992, 3 trillion tons of ice has melted. Overall, world sea levels have risen about 20 centimetres in the past century. If the right decisions are not made to preserve Antarctica in the next 10 years, the consequences will be felt around the world.
Antarctica has in it enough ice that if it all melted, sea levels will rise globally by over 60 metres. And what we're starting to see are the first signs of some of that ice starting to melt. And so it's completely possible for Antarctica to contribute several tens of centimetres in this century.
Coastal flooding during storms at high tides will be more damaging and a threat to cities from New York to Shanghai, as well as low-lying nations from the Pacific Ocean to the Netherlands. Some changes are already irreversible, but by reducing CO2 emissions, this will help towards preventing the situation worsening.
Louise Minor reporting there. Now, the graffiti artist Banksy uses great stealth when he goes about his work, and now a thief has taken a leaf out of the master's book to steal one of his works from a Toronto exhibition. Closed-circuit TV, as you see on your screen, captured the culprit tiptoeing into the warehouse where the show was being set up. Before, watch this, calmly walking off with the €30,000 print. Well, the missing artwork is called Trolley Hunters right there. As for the identity of the thief, it's as mysterious as that of the artist himself. Thank you for joining us today on Good Morning Europe, and do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. And we'll leave you with today's no comment and the huge crowds from Mecca marking the end of Ramadan.
ولن يتمنوه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين ولتجدنهم أحرص الناس على حياة ومن الذين أشركوا يود أحد